The first time I noticed the door, I thought it was a mistake, a simple oversight. It was late evening, and I had just moved into the building a week ago. The hallway was quiet, dimly lit, the kind of place where footsteps echo too loudly. As I passed apartment 3B, I saw it, his door slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light spilled into the corridor, a quiet invitation. I hesitated. Inside, I could hear movement, a faint rustling, the clink of a glass, the low hum of a song playing somewhere beyond my view. The world outside the door felt intimate, like I was peering into a moment I wasn't meant to see. Then, as if sensing my presence, he appeared. Daniel. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew his type. Effortlessly confident, the kind of man who carried himself like he belonged everywhere. He was leaning casually against the doorframe, a half smile on his lips as he met my gaze. "You always walk this slow, or is my door just that interesting?" he asked. His voice was smooth, teasing. I felt my pulse quicken. I forced a chuckle. "Did you leave it open on purpose?" He tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. "Would you believe me if I said no?" I wasn't sure. Something about him unsettled me. Not in a bad way, but in the way you feel when you stand too close to the edge of something unknown. A thrill, laced with uncertainty. I nodded toward the door. "Might not be safe to leave it open like that." He smirked. "Depends on who walks by." A silence stretched between us, charged with something unspoken. Then, as if deciding the conversation had reached its natural end, Daniel gave me a slow, deliberate nod. "See you around, neighbor." And with that, he slipped back inside, pulling the door shut behind him. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, staring at the now closed door. Something about it didn't feel finished. The next night, the door was open again. And the night after that. Each time, the same scene, warm light spilling out, soft sounds from inside, Daniel eventually appearing with that knowing smirk. He never invited me in, never said more than a few teasing words before disappearing back inside. It was a game, I realized, a silent challenge. I told myself I wasn't curious, that I didn't care. But on the fourth night, as I stood in the dimly lit hallway once again, something changed. This time, before he could speak, I took a step forward. "All right," I said, crossing the threshold. "You win." And with that, I stepped inside, into his world, into something I couldn't yet name. Stepping into Daniel's apartment felt like entering another world. The space was warm, inviting, and effortlessly elegant. Dim lighting, shelves lined with books, a faint trace of cologne lingering in the air. A jazz record played softly in the background, adding an almost cinematic quality to the moment. Daniel watched me with quiet amusement as I took in my surroundings. "I was starting to think you'd never accept the invitation," he said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I smirked. "You were counting on me being curious, weren't you?" He handed me a glass, his fingers brushing against mine. Just for a second, but long enough to send a quiet spark through me. "Curiosity makes life interesting," he murmured. And just like that, I was pulled in. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel became a constant presence in my life. We spent evenings on his couch, talking for hours, his words always laced with just enough mystery to keep me wanting more. There was something intoxicating about him. The way he spoke, the way he listened, as if everything I said mattered. But Daniel was careful. He let me in just enough to make me feel special, but never so much that I truly understood him. He dodged personal questions with charming deflections, changed the subject with a well-timed joke. I told myself it didn't matter. One night, as we sat on his balcony, the city glowing beneath us, he turned to me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. "You ever wonder if some people are meant to come into our lives just to shake things up?" I frowned. What do you mean? He leaned back, exhaling slowly. Not everyone's meant to stay. Some people just teach us something about ourselves before they go. The words unsettled me, but before I could respond, he reached for my hand. His touch silenced my doubts, replacing them with something softer, something I wanted to believe in. Then he kissed me, and in that moment, every unspoken question faded into the background. I had fallen for him, completely, but love has a way of making you ignore the things you shouldn't. The unanswered phone calls, the way he always avoided discussing the future, the lingering sense that I wasn't the only one in his life. I told myself I was overthinking, that Daniel wasn't hiding anything, until the night I woke up in his bed, reached for my phone, and saw a message flash across his screen. A name I didn't recognize. I miss you. My stomach twisted. Daniel stirred beside me, unaware that in an instant, the illusion had cracked. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure I wanted to know what was behind that door after all. I told myself it was nothing. A friend. A misunderstanding. Anything but the truth. My gut was already screaming at me. But doubt is a relentless thing. Once planted, it grows, twisting its roots through every quiet moment, every unanswered question. Daniel hadn't seen the message. He was still asleep beside me, his face peaceful, unaware that my world had shifted. I should have confronted him then, shaken him awake and demanded the truth. Instead, I slipped out of bed, pulled on my clothes and left. I needed time, space, a chance to convince myself that I was overreacting. But the universe had other plans. 2 nights later, I passed his apartment and saw the door open again. But this time, I wasn't the one being invited in. I stopped in my tracks. Laughter, low, intimate, drifted into the hallway. The kind of laughter that made my stomach clench because I knew it wasn't mine. A silhouette moved inside. Someone else. And then his voice. The same tone he used with me, warm and teasing. The same effortless charm that had pulled me in, now being offered to someone else. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen. But before I could move, Daniel stepped into view. He turned toward the door, smiling at whoever was inside, and then he saw me. For a second, the world froze. His expression shifted. Shock, guilt, something unreadable flashing across his face. And then, just as quickly, he masked it. "Hey," he said, his voice unervingly casual, as if we were just 2 neighbors passing in the hall. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay steady. "Who is it this time?" A pause. Then a slow, tired sigh. "It's not what you think." I let out a hollow laugh. "Then tell me what it is, Daniel." He didn't, because we both knew. The silence between us stretched, filled with all the unspoken things I had ignored. The way he never let me get too close, the way he always kept 1 foot out the door. It had never been just me. I should have been angry, should have screamed, demanded explanations, made a scene. But I didn't. I just nodded, a strange sense of calm washing over me. "I get it now," I said quietly. "Some doors aren't meant to stay open forever." Then, before he could say another word, I turned and walked away. Daniel didn't stop me, and that told me everything I needed to know. The days that followed felt like a blur. I avoided Daniel's apartment, kept my distance, and tried to bury the sting of betrayal under the weight of other things. Work, friends, fleeting distractions. But every corner I turned, every quiet moment, I was reminded of him. The way he'd smiled at me, the way his laugh had sounded when it was just the 2 of us. I couldn't escape the shadow of what we'd shared, and what he'd taken with him. It was strange, almost laughable. How could someone I barely knew, someone who had let me in only enough to make me believe in something real, leave such a lasting mark? I had my answers now. The illusion of him was shattered. The door he'd opened had closed behind me, and yet, I couldn't help but wonder if it was never meant to be open in the first place. And then, on the 5th day, there he was, standing outside his door as I passed by. "Hey!" His voice was hesitant, almost fragile. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I knew what he wanted to say. I knew the apology was coming. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone pleading. I shook my head, finally facing him. The anger I thought I'd feel wasn't there. Instead, there was only a quiet resignation. "I don't think there's anything left to say." Daniel's face fell, and I could see it: regret, guilt, just beneath the surface. "You don't understand." I raised a hand, stopping him. "I don't need to. I've been in your apartment, Daniel. I've seen the way you are with people. The way you give just enough, never too much. I was never meant to stay." His eyes searched mine, desperate for something, an answer, perhaps. But there was nothing left for him to take from me. "You've taught me something," I continued, my voice steady. "You taught me that sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us because we're too caught up in what we want to believe." I saw his lips part, but I didn't wait for him to speak. "You've had your chance, and I've had mine, and now it's over." I turned and walked away. This time, there was no hesitation, no longing to look back. I didn't need to know why he'd done it. I didn't need closure. What I needed was to leave him behind, to leave behind the door I had stepped through, and the part of me that had believed in something that wasn't real. As I walked past his apartment one last time, I saw the door ajar. But this time I didn't stop. I didn't even glance at it, because I was done looking for something behind a door that was never meant to open.